YouTube. Welcome back to my channel, YouTube. If y'all are new here, my name is Angel Uchiha. If you are not new, then of course, welcome back. As usual, I want to thank y'all for liking, commenting, subscribing, running those views up, all that good shit that y'all do to keep this channel alive. And I do want to apologize for any ghetto behavior y'all hear in the background. Okay, my children are running amok. Um, so as y'all can see, I do have a special guest with me today. This is the Omnist Roan. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. First off, I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself to the people. Just let them know a little bit about you, what you do.
My name is Tyrone, but I go by the Omnius Run on Instagram and on YouTube. And basically, what I personally do with my content is I like to put out a different source of content and a lot of different sorts of videos and stuff like that to inform a lot of different people on a different aspect to spirituality and mysticism that people really aren't familiar with. And it kind of catches people off when they come to my page because all of a sudden they might think that I'm some type of devil worshiper or something. But what I like to be is literally the devil's advocate,
Mm-hmm.
which my whole brand is, it surrounds the basis of becoming the adversary, which everybody needs to become their own personal rebel or adversary to fight up against the injustices within their own personal life. So what I personally do with my brand is I like to be that symbol or that energy force for somebody in their personal life to become that personal rebel, or for people to ask questions, to think outside the box, to be that critical deep thinker, while you're surrounded by a flock of sheep. And so that's what basically my content and that my page does, is that it helps you to really think outside of the box and really be more self-aware about yourself and the people around you and your own personal life.
Okay. So that's absolutely amazing. I love that. That was something I was gonna ask you about, is me kind of just seeing the symbology with the Baphomet and many of other things that I notice some people are going to instantly think Satan worshiper, right?
Yeah.
And so I did want to kind of inquire about that and get your perspective. Me personally, and we're gonna get into this. I've been in
Mhm.
quite a journey with my spirituality, my belief systems, and with all of that, I personally don't have any bias towards anything. So if you were to get on here and say I'm a Satan worshiper, okay, that's what's up. Tell us about it, right?
Right.
Um, I'm not one of those people that is very like, oh my gosh, he has the 666. Like, oh my gosh, the
You
Illuminati
speaking
got
out.
him. Like people like that get on my nerves, right? And so that's why I like that you point out having the sort of devil's advocate mentality, and that you should be that for yourself, right?
Hmm.
That's something I was like talking about recently, of how I noticed even within myself, like somebody will ask me my perspective on something, and there's this kind of knee jerk reaction to say, well, this is what I think is right, and this is what I think is incorrect. And you kind of have to ask yourself, why? Why do
Yeah.
you think that's incorrect? For what reason? And
Hmm.
I find that often enough, our reasons are more so, this is what I've been conditioned to believe, right? We
Yeah.
don't do this because if you do that, you're going to hell, right?
Hmm.
And not enough people challenge that in their daily life, right? So I think that that's very interesting. So the wrong part is explained, right?
Hmm.
But I do notice the omnist in your title. Do
Right.
you So I know what an omnist is, right? Do you
Hmm.
care to explain that for the people?
Gladly. My and my perception of omniism is a little more advanced than what you will find on Google or social media. Because when you go on social media, when you go on Google, it'll give you this little vague definition of like somebody who respects all different sorts of truth when it comes to religion. But I like to expand omniism to this philosophy of understanding that truth is connected to everything. And so to become omnious, basically, you have to see truth in all different sorts of things. And the way that I became omnious was I was in college and I was going to this philosophy lecture for extra credit in one of my classes. And this Hindu woman had quoted the Vedas, and she said that the truth is one, but the wise call it by many different names. And it had just sparked a
Mm.
flash, like a light in me. And I'm like, I never heard that before. So while I was studying and doing my essay on my research paper on the philosophy lecture, I was looking up that specific quote, and I found omniism, and it brought me to this concept of what is called neti neti, in the Hindu, which basically means not this, not that. And it basically brings out that when it concerns something um, that is like primary or that's specific, when it concerns truth or what is connected, there really is no specific like label or name or nothing that you could really pinpoint on what could be the true image or the true like end all be all to truth and reality in itself, because everything's connected. So when you understand that everything is connected and everything is a reflection of one another and everything is a projection, and everything basically has a relation to one another, then you'll understand that you can't really suppress truth or the all supreme power that other people may call God, Allah, infinite reality, the universe, so on and so forth. You can't really suppress that to a label, to a name, to a God. And I like to use the example of like music or different genres of film, and or like when you go to a particular store or restaurant, they're not going to just serve one type of food or one type of drink or one type of flavor. They're going to have these different variations of things that people can choose from, because in reality, everybody is different, and nobody's just going to go to a particular place to choose the same thing. Some people do, and within those realms, you have people who just personally are Christian, people who are just personally Hindu, people who are just personally Buddhist. But then you have people out there who are very deep thinkers, who want to study more perspectives, who like more flavors than just strawberry or just blueberry or just orange. They like
Mhm.
different flavors within the whole bunch. They like different foods. They like to try out. They like to travel. They like to discover different things. You know, and that's basically how I take omnism, where I just don't look at everything in just one way or everything just linear. Everything basically has a connection to one another.
Mhm. Um, that's what's up. I feel like that's a lot of what I've sort of learned in my journey as well. We're gonna get into religions because I know there's something interesting that you said on your page recently, right?
Mm,
But in that journey, I started off very dogmatic, very opinionated, um, very, if I walk into one way of life, I have to like rip this shit with every bone in my body. And
yeah.
if you oppose it, I'm gonna like cut you down. Like
Hmm.
and so I've kind of come full circle to realize that it doesn't fucking matter. Like it
Yeah.
matters, but it doesn't. Like
Hmm.
like the obsession or fixation of creating this one set way of life. Like I think like the best way I can kind of explain it is it's almost like, say if your goal is to lose weight and have a healthy lifestyle, you can do the keto diet, you can do the alkaline diet, you can do low carb, high this, you can do high protein. There's different ways to do it, right?
Hmm.
um you can do Pilates, you can do CrossFit, you can do yoga. You don't have to lock yourself into only one way of exercising and only one form of diet if your goal is health, right?
Right.
I think that religion, spirituality, they're all like regimens, right? They're all routines or lifestyles that we incorporate, but it all comes with that same goal of trying to feel closer to the source or the creator or whatever it is that you call it in your way of life, right? So yeah, I absolutely am 100% in agreement with that way of looking at things, right?
Mm.
Um so what I was going to say earlier is that I noticed you said that you used to be a Hebrew Israelite, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, first of all, were you raised Hebrew Israelite or was that something that you converted to later in life?
So this was around. So I had got rid of Christianity when I was like 17, going on 18. This was like the like very late 2016, going on to like the very beginning of 2017. And
Hmm.
so I immediately got into the whole Black conscious movement, was pro Black and everything of that sort. And I started studying a different source of Black consciousness. When 2019 came, 2 years later, I started to look back into the Bible, but from a mystical perspective. Unfortunately, I went a little too deep into the Bible, like a nosedive, and then I came out as a Hebrew Israelite. So it's kind of like a mixture of Bible doctrine and then pro blackness, and then that's where you get kind of like the whole Hebrew Israelite thing, which a Hebrew Israelite basically is like a Christian but 2.0. But for
Yeah.
me, I wasn't a Hebrew Israelite in the way that you'll see a lot of these Negroes out here. Like I was more so of like a Hebrew Israelite, but trying to understand the Bible stuff from a mystical perspective, and it was very confusing for myself to try and get to the mystical stuff and trying to bring that out, and then also trying to adhere to like the ear of the Hebrew Israelite community, because a lot of the Hebrew Israelites thought that I was blasphemous or whatever the case was, because my perceptions on being a Hebrew were very very slim. It just it's kind of like night and day almost to them. And we was just on two different. We was just focusing on two different things, and so when like August and September of 2019 came around, I started to bring out more of the mystical stuff. Um, and, that's how I slowly started to deviate out of the Hebrew Israelite stuff. But I was raised up Christian on both sides of my family. So that's kind of where I have that connection or relation to the Bible. Both sides of my family were Christian. Both my grandparents on both sides of the family were leaders of the deacon board, and they were close friends to the pastor. My dad's church and then my mom's church. So it runs deep within my family. It's very shocking that I came out the person that I came out to be today, because this was not supposed to happen. If you look at my lineage and my background, I was supposed to be some holy sanctified Baptist minister, raising up a church audience or whatever the case is. But you know, fortunately enough, we shift gears, and I am who I am today.
Man, I think a lot of us can relate to that, especially because Christianity is so rampant
Yeah.
within society. I definitely can. I definitely was raised up bullshit Christian. That's what I'll say.
Hmm.
I'm Christian. I call on Jesus's name at random, go to
Hmm.
church, but I couldn't tell you what a single page of the Bible says verbatim, right? Just kind of regurgitating shit, right? So
Hmm.
I definitely felt that, and that was one of the things that kind of pushed me away from the Bible and religion. Was like, I went to church, and even as a little kid, I felt the bullshit of it all. Like, what? Like, what? You just was okay. Never mind. And then when I ask certain questions, you can't. You tell me this is how it is, and I say why, and you can't tell me an answer, right?
Yeah.
That makes me feel like you're full of shit. Um,
Hmm.
and then when I was around 10 years old, um, I called myself reading the Bible cover to cover, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I surprisingly did. I did it. Now, mind you, there was no way that I fully processed or understood what I was reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I saw enough to let me know that I had been lied to or I had been misinformed about many things, right? And my brain just kind of rejected it, right? And so from that point forth, I went all over the place. Man, when I say all over the place, hoodoo, voodoo, Wicca,
Mm-hmm.
um, I thought I was Commission at one point,
Yeah.
came full cycle, and I ended up actually studying with Hebrew Israelites, right?
Mm-hmm.
I never fully identified as a Hebrew Israelite. I kind of was just sitting around listening to the brothers yelling and assault everybody and, researching and going
Mm-hmm.
through, just kind of just filling it out. And I had a similar mentality because, like you said, when you look at the Bible from a mystical perspective, it's very difficult to retrain your brain to only look at it from a like religious perspective, if that makes sense. Like, so how many of most religious people or people of the book, right, will read Genesis, for example, and they will take it literally. Oh, Adam came first, and then the woman came, and then she brought the apple, and then like they look at it very literally, right?
Yeah.
And they live their life as if these events actually took place,
Mm-hmm.
and as if this somehow proves that women are the weaker vessel, and blah blah blah, right? So as much as I tried, I never could force my brain to re-believe that these things were anything other than metaphorical,
Yeah.
right? Or mystical in nature. So I did want to ask you, right? And I know you hit on this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain more
Mm-hmm.
of coming from that mystical perspective and then delving back into the scripture. How were you able to say to yourself, you know what? I'm a Hebrew Israelite, but I believe differently. Like, what triggered you to want to identify as a Hebrew Israelite, even having that mystical perspective?
I think what did it for me was um like going into, I think from 2018 going to 2019, I started seeing that like people were talking about different concepts concerning the Christ figure, and so they were saying like Christ is the symbol of your higher self, and the devil is a symbol of your lower self, and the whole like the 12 disciples is a symbol of your 12 cranial nerves, or the Jacob's ladders is a symbol for your kundalini or your 33 vertebrae. The 33 vertebrae basically is like the 33 years of Jesus. And I thought that all of that was just very interesting. I'm like, oh snap, let me really take a second look back at the Bible and really see what is it saying on a deeper level. And I think unfortunately what ended up happening was um, as I started studying deeper into that aspect, I had certain influences during that time that were saying like, well, all this, science and information came from us anyway. And if we really want to look at it, because black people were the first people on earth and everything of that sort, oh, then we must be the Israelites. We must be the chosen people. And so because of that influence, being in my life at such a very early age, plus the people during that time that I was around concerning the whole pro-black conscious movement, I thought they were getting a little phony. And so I was looking at the Hebrew Israelites. I'm like, oh, well, they seem like to have a little bit of a brotherhood. But they were
Yeah.
just as phony because when it comes to the Hebrew Israelites, it's like you have to adhere to their certain doctrine in order for them to really showcase brotherhood. And so for me, at the at the early stages of that, I thought, oh, they got a good brotherhood here. They got a whole, they unified and everything. They hold it down, and it was all good up until I started to deviate from their doctrine, and I started
Mm.
to really bring out different things. And then when they found out I didn't take the Bible literal, that was a whole nother problem for them, because they're like, how can you not take the Bible literal? I'm like, how can you take the Bible literal? And I'm like, I bring out like just simple stories. I'm like, you can't think that Jonah was in the belly of a big ass fish for like 3 days, right? And like, well, the Lord can do everything. I'm like, well, nigga, he can't do that. He can't he can't have somebody survive in the belly of a fish. Well, especially in like that type of digestive system and the toxins going on there. It's not possible. You can't tell me that Noah took two of every animal and put it on a ship. And they was on that ship for, I want to say, and I may be a little wrong on this, but they was on that ship for somewhere between 3 to 4 months, I believe. It's just not possible for one of every animal to live on that ship for that long, knowing everybody has a different eating system. There's some people who might be prey to another and predators to another. It's just not likely, you know. And then people believing in a Jesus figure that died and rose from the dead after 3 days. They don't even study about the whole story of the sun entering into the Crux constellation, which is the whole symbolism of the winter solstice. Where the sun basically is seen as to die and then be reborn after 3 days. It's just like a lot of these stories are just retold stories that you see from the stars, and a lot of people just ain't putting two and two together. So they kind of focus on the lowest way that they can really interpret the Bible. But to get back on subject though, that's that's what really, I think that's what did it for me. That's what um jogged me to being a Hebrew Israelite was they looked like they had like a very strong force. They looked like they had a very strong foundation. And I will say some of them have stronger foundations than Christian churches or some conscious communities, but it's all one and the same. It's just a different flavor, just a stronger taste.
Mm. Um, yeah, I think everything you said there is completely valid. I know that what attracts a lot of people is like the blackness in the militants, right?
Yeah.
Seeing black people, and they're usually very urban black people, right? They're not usually Negro peens.
Mhm.
Seeing very, militant and disciplined black people from the hood with that much conviction and meaning in their life, of course is going to be very and like you said, that sense of brotherhood and sisterhood being there as well, when many of us come from broken homes and you know um chaos within the nuclear family. I definitely think that is something that is appealing to a lot of people. The same thing with Islam, which is something else I got wrapped up in, but again,
Mhm.
that's another conversation. So I completely understand that, and I also understand getting kicked out because you don't believe how they believe. My first strike was them with them was the fact that I didn't want to stay in KJV. Right. I
Yeah.
don't know if all the Hebrew Israelite camps are like that, but I know the one that I was around heavily, they only dealt with KJV. So when I came trying to read the book of Barnabas and the
Mhm.
Gnostic Gospels and you know the Dead Sea Scrolls and all this, they like they looking at me like I'm a mutant, right?
Mhm.
So that was the first uh transgression, right? And then secondly, it was like you said, not taking things literal, right? I remember bringing up the story of Jacob and Esau and
Yeah.
just feeling like it was very, very symbolic and not literal, right? And that was a whole back and forth in debate. But the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, was when I started calling out the inconsistencies of Paul
Mhm.
and specifically what was said in Galatians about um essentially the covenant being null and void because it was fulfilled through Jesus Christ, right?
Mm.
And that by having faith in the Christ, it doesn't matter what your bloodline is, right? um that pissed them clean the fuck off, like,
Yeah.
because I'm like, this doesn't make sense. If you're gonna say you accept the Old Testament and the New Testament makes it very clear that as long as you have faith in Jesus, it doesn't matter what your blood type is. Like, in the fact that y'all are still pushing that there's only 144,000 chosen and it's only black people because we're the true children of, that's very contradictory to what's being said in the scripture. And yeah, so after that,
Mm.
they was pretty much done with me and I was done with them. um, so yeah, if y'all are watching this, don't get wrapped up and don't get sucked in by seeing that strong um unified front and think I want to be a part of that, because like he said, if you don't follow their beliefs to an exact T, if you try to think for yourself, if you ask any questions, you will be berated and belittled and probably excommunicated if you push it far enough, right?
With the quick.
Um yeah, so there's definitely that. So, speaking of the scripture, earlier we spoke briefly about Lilith, right?
Mm.
Um that's something that's interesting to me as well, especially because I noticed that on your page, you what's what I want to look for? You show a great deal of honor for um sensuality, female sensuality and sexuality, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's an interesting conversation because I know that Lilith is always somehow tied to that.
Mm.
Um but she's demonized, right? For that. So this is a bit of a two-part question. I want to know what were you talking about earlier about Lilith, right? And the
Mm.
true reason of why she was tossed out the garden.
Yeah. So like, Lilith is a symbol for the wild woman archetype. So she basically is the one who is the feminine adversary. As like, there's a book that I was reading called the Bible of the Adversary, and they kind of go in depth on the whole aspect of the feminine adversary. What's the author's name? Michael W. Ford. That's his name. So the book is called The Bible of the Adversary by Michael W. Ford. He goes into depth on this archetype of the adversary and also deals with the masculine and the feminine aspect of it. And so the masculine aspect is Samael, and then the feminine aspect is Lilith. And so what you see in this legend with Lilith is that she is depicted as being Adam's first wife. And so if you study like the book of Genesis, there's two different creation accounts that you're going to have a whole sector of theologians giving different explanations for why there's a different section of a creation account in Genesis 1, and then why there's a whole different setting in Genesis 2. What I was told in the church was that Genesis chapter 1 was just giving you the order of things, and then Genesis chapter 2 is getting you into the story of things. But that don't even make sense either, because there's clearly two different sources of what's going on, because you can't say man and woman was created together and God told them to be fruitful and multiply. But then in Genesis chapter 2, God makes man before he makes the animals. So it's like there's two different things going on here. In Genesis 1, he makes the animals, then he makes man and woman. In Genesis 2, he makes man, then he makes the animals, then he makes the woman. And if we're going by this order of things, that to me is very telling on where you're going to put the woman at. Uh, but putting on going back to Lilith though, in this book that they found, and I believe it's called the Alphabet of Ben Sira or Ben Sira. And basically, this is one of the very few sources that you'll be able to find the story of Lilith, because they kind of literally annihilated her story. And the only way that you're gonna see her in the actual Bible of today is in the book of Isaiah, where they identify a feminine or a female night creature. And that female night creature, when you go back to the Hebrew, is depicted or is said to be named Lilith, which is basically identified or defined to be the night creature. Getting back to Lilith's story, Adam and Lilith were in the garden, and basically this all goes back to sex. Lilith basically will always be under Adam whenever they was getting into it. And basically this time around, Lilith wanted to be on top, which you could say is multi-layered. You know, her being on top is like them sharing the same exchange of rulership over one another in terms of relationship, in terms of like dominance and just sharing that unionship with one another. And Adam's rejection to that can be symbolized as basically him trying to, define his rulership over a woman, or his ego getting into play, or being insecure, because he's like, I'm not being under a woman. I'm only on top because I'm a man. And Lilith going back and forth with Adam is like, well, since we are equal, we come from the same earth, and we was created equally. We should be able to switch out, or we should be able to exchange the same level of, this unionship whenever we get down with it. And Adam's like, no, I'm not with that. I'm the only one that could be on top, because I'm a man. And that's that's basically the narrative that you see there, which, like I said, is multi-layered, because it kind of shows you, you know the early stages of, for lack of a better term, like patriarchal rulership over femininity and the feminine nature. And so, because Lilith was not down with the get down, Lilith basically cursed Adam, and cursed God, because he called God by his actual name, grew wings and flew off from the Garden of Eden. And basically, the angels were trying to, like, you know convince her to come back and everything of that sort. She cursed them out again, and basically they tried to demonize her, saying that she'll never be able to birth children again, and all these different sorts of things. They kind of give her this negative tale, this very negative, like, ending to her, saying like she's this evil demon spirit that takes babies and all these different things. And this is the legends and tales that they'll say throughout Jewish mythology. I, however, interpret the story a little different. I look at it from the point of her being the adversary, or being the rebel, the one who was strong enough to think for herself and not just be subservient or subordinate to Adam and to God, and basically stood out on her own 2 feet, to become that symbol for herself, or that goddess for herself. It's like the same thing they do for Lucifer. Lucifer, they'll make all these different narratives for why he created a whole rebellion in heaven. And Christians will tell you, well, it's because he wanted to be like God. And it's like a cop out. It's like, you could say that he wanted to be like God, but what was truly the real narrative behind that? And so it's just very interesting that these same people, these Hebrew people, the elites, the Israelites, they create this propaganda around their enemies. And you kind of see the same thing in today's
Mm-hmm.
society, of how they create the propaganda, against people who go against their narrative or against their agenda. And they did this a lot in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s, when black people were creating this revolutionary movement. And they started to try and demonize the revolutionary movement, because we were redefining what blackness was. So we were saying black power, we were saying black is beautiful. And, in response to this, they create this COINTELPRO, and it was like, yeah, we got to prevent the rise of another black messiah. And it kind of just, you kind of see this correlation with them being afraid of this unionship. And you kind of see this in the Bible as well, with Adam and Eve eating from the tree. And God tells his counsel, he's like, if they become, they've already become like us, knowing good and evil. And if they eat from that tree of life, they're going to live forever. And it kind of sounds like that alone is jeopardizing their godhood.
Mm-hmm.
Even further down into the story of in Genesis, you get the Tower of Babel, and they're building the Tower of Babel to reach the heavens. And God goes back to his counsel again and is like, yo, if they fulfill their order of like building this tower, who knows what else they might do? Which again sounds like that humanity is once again trying to jeopardize the divinity of the gods. And so the same way, the same interaction that you'll see of them demonizing humanity because of them advancing or them having this sort of independent thought, is also projected in Christianity and within Christians and religious people when you begin to build your own identity and you begin to think for yourself. And that's exactly what Lilith did, is that she stuck out, she stuck her neck out for herself and became that independent, for lack of a better term, an independent woman. Even though she later on down the line, she found her own personal mate, Samael, but she became that wild woman archetype. She became that icon or that figure to not just go with the system of things and what was deemed to be the norm, you know.
Hmm. I think that I think it's interesting that you pointed out how like the demonization of Eve coincides with propaganda being the response to any type of individuality or diversion from indoctrination, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that was going to kind of lead me into my next question about your philosophy, right? Is how you see the way that women today who are quote unquote independent, who aren't interested in marriage, who are open with their sensuality or sexuality, and don't necessarily adhere to the traditional way of doing things, the first thing that kind of happens is that they're belittled and they're demonized, and they're painted in this very negative light, as if they will never be happy and they will never have children, that will be raised well and fruitful, right? And you're gonna die alone with a bunch of cats, right? This is the type
Mm-hmm.
of energy that is cast onto women simply for not wanting to participate in patriarchy. Um,
Yeah.
and me being a matriarchal woman, and practicing goddess worship and creating a culture with my partner, that is the opposite of that. Trust and believe. I've heard more than an earful about the type of Lilith that I am, in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, right?
And Jezebel
Um,
spirits.
Yes, exactly. And I can admit that I've been so submerged in this society for so long that I still find myself um wrestling with my own preconceived ideas and
Yeah.
how I feel about that. Like how I felt the need to sort of clean up my image or my sensuality, or just these aspects of myself. I've always felt the need to find a way to refine these things and make them more presentable, for a woman in today's society, right? And coming full circle to the devil's advocacy that we spoke about earlier. Why? Right? As a woman, why do I have to present myself in a certain way? Oh, you should cover up. Why? For what?
Yeah.
What does that say about me? Oh, you should be married. For what? What's the purpose of that? Oh, you shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have children with more than one man. Why? What's the reason? Like what is the
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of these things don't have truly logical reasons. They're all kind of just rooted in, well, this is what is becoming of a lady. This is what sounds good to a high value man. You know, no high value man is gonna want a woman that's blah 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 and do do do, and if you have an OnlyFans and no no no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm sure you've heard these things as well. Um, what? How do I want to word this? How do you still like have honor or reverence for the woman when she's in her raw form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, even though you've been, like you said, you're raised in a Christian household, you had your stint with Hebrew Israelites, you've been kind of, inclined or positioned to think the opposite, right? How do
Right.
you look at a woman like Sexy Red, or a woman that is extremely in touch with her sexuality, and still say that's a woman, that is a divine goddess, despite what society has formulated?
I think it took two things. It took me being authentic with myself and what I truly like in a woman, and then two, it took me basically putting aside my ego when it concerns sexuality. Because the number one thing that really gets men in a knot, when it concerns women of a certain type, or a woman who has no problem being who she is the ego of man. And the ego of man has been his downfall. And it has stopped him from achieving his greatest potential, and also getting his greatest partner. And you'll see that a lot with a lot of men on social media, with the red pill movement and so on and so forth, of these different sectors of men who have been trying to demonize women for being the woman that they like. And something that I've said in previous videos and stuff like that is, you want a woman who's a freak in the sheets, but a lady in the streets. But you can't get the lady in the streets unless she become a freak first. Like, you can't really get the woman that you want to be a lady in the streets and a freak in the sheets for, unless she was a freak for somebody else first. And most men, they have this. It's like going back to the whole concept of Adam, of how he was treating Lilith, where they want to have possession over the woman. They want to control how she basically presents her sexuality, stuff like that. And so you'll see men who don't have an issue with a woman being sexual, don't have an issue with a woman, expressing herself sexually, or being that Sexy Red in the bedroom, or being that Megan Thee Stallion, as long as it's just personally for them. If you're just
Mhm.
their personal Sexy Red, or their personal Megan Thee Stallion, then that's fine. That's cool and dandy. But if you're out here like, Ishtar in the legend, Ishtar would not tire, then you got an issue. Or if you're like Aphrodite, who has many lovers, now all of a sudden it's a problem.
Mhm.
And a lot of men don't really tap into studying the different faces, and the different archetypes of femininity, because it just really makes them insecure. And it doesn't help that there's all these different narratives from a lot of these different podcasts and a lot of these different agendas that you see on social media, where they're telling men that if a woman is acting this way or that way, or if she has this type of body count, or that type of, or if she had this type of past, and just dealing on the carnal aspect of things, and the physicality of things, that, not saying that it necessarily doesn't matter, but when you're dealing with a woman who's really her authentic self, it doesn't even have to be a woman that you might deem to be the average spiritual woman. But if it's a woman that's really authentic with you and real with you, you should have nothing to worry about. And what's truly ironic is that it's the goody two shoe women that really be the ones that you should look out for, because they're hiding something that they don't want the world to see. A lot of them they have this persona, they have this mask that they're wearing, and that those are the ones you should really look out, is for the woman that's hiding her past, the woman that's hiding who she truly is, the one that's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Whereas the woman that you truly desire, The one that you want to call whore, the one that you want to call prostitute, or the one that you want to call a hot girl. That's the girl that you're drooling over. That's the one you want a wife. But your ego keeps getting in the way because you asking all these questions. How many men she been with? Or how she know how to do that? How she know how to do this? And you try to put all these restraints on the person that you desire when that person can be the lady for you in the streets. She can be the like your greatest example, or your you know somebody who can represent you well if you treat her right. And then on top of that, if you allow her to be if you allow her to be her truly, her true authentic self. So it just kind of really deals into a lot of just her being who she is as a woman, um when it comes to that whole sector of things. And that's what I truly think. That's what's holding men back, is just their ego when it concerns like women and their sexuality.
I certainly agree. I think that there's way too much fixation on um establishing control and turning the male ego and emotions into ways of life or laws, right? I think that's like the biggest consistency that I've noticed within these Abrahamic religions, within the red pill community and
Mm-hmm.
simp culture, and like, to me it just sounds like men turning their ego and their feelings into laws that everyone else has to abide by, right?
Yeah.
um Specifically women, but it trickles over to men too, because if you think differently, well, now you're a simp.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're a beta male, right? um and that fixation of controlling the existence of other beings to the point where even if I can't directly control you, I'm going to put a narrative so powerful on you that it ends up controlling you anyways, right?
Yeah.
um and this is where, like, coming full circle, this is where you get Lucifer being brandished as this devil, right?
Mm-hmm.
um Lilith being brandished as this she devil, right? For eternity,
Yeah.
um because of simple free will, right? Nothing wrong was actually done. When we look into the origin of when I read all through the scripture, not just with Lilith, not just with Satan, but even with the fallen, right? The fallen angels, quote unquote, where I know there's discrepancy there, right?
Mm-hmm.
um in the book of Enoch, what wrong was actually done, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Beings fell in love with other beings, had sex, made offspring. They taught them metalwork and art and, makeup and astrology, all this good stuff. They ate a couple apples and gained some knowledge. What actual unconceivable evil actually took place? I've personally have yet to find it, right?
Right.
The simple act of experiencing life in a way that was not commanded of them is what we have labeled these beings evil for, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we carry that with us. And so I did want to ask you, if you believe that these stories are metaphorical or allegorical,
Yeah.
what do you think the purpose was in telling them?
I think like culturally, I think every culture or every civilization of people probably just have different stories and legends to depict different layers and different sectors of knowledge and information. What I found to be interesting about the Bible, and but the Bible may not just be excluded with this type of level of like layered text, but I found it to be very interesting that you can look at the Bible and read it, and you can probably get like 4 to 5 different layered type of like information from it. So like for an example, like the book of Revelations, If you read the book of Revelations, a Christian might take that as, oh, this is the picture for the end times. If a mystic reads it, they could understand like the different symbols, like in terms of the red dragon or the lady of stars, or the beast, the woman who rides on the beast, or the seven churches and the seven seals going to the seven chakras, new heaven and a new earth representing the regeneration of your spiritual and physical body. You know, a mystic could read all that in the book of Revelations. Um, an elitist or somebody who is somebody who's like into military stuff and military arts, they might look at the book of Revelations as a tactic to rule, you know, something that's like political. So you have all these different sectors that you see in the Bible of like things being layered down, layered out. And so I think that there were certain civilizations of people that were so well equipped with information and knowledge that they were able to create stories that were multi-layered, to where you have the exoteric understanding, like people who were never really meant to get the real information, the real substance. So they read all these different stories in the Bible, they read different stories, and they just take it at face value. Which I really don't know how you could do that, but they take these stories at face value. Or you have the people who are esoteric, and they take the hidden information or the hidden knowledge or the occult knowledge, and they use the stories to their advantage, to their their individual spiritual journey.
Hmm. Man, I just think it's really becoming a. I'm not even gonna say it's becoming. I think this shit is a dead cause, right? That's why that's why I am diligently working on creating my own space and culture, because I just feel like we've
Mm,
reached a point in society, which I'm sure we've reached before, where we're kind of past the point of no return. I think that we're in a cycle of creation and recreation, and eventually that cycle will come to an end again, right?
yeah.
Um, and I feel like this is very evident to me in the way that these stories, these fables, are told all over the place from all different kinds of societies. I think the main thing that kind of really snapped me out of the Abrahamic religions was realizing that I can find the same exact story of Noah told just slightly differently, with the Sumerians, right?
Hmm.
Um and it kind of becomes clear of, okay, this is not a law book. This is not truly something that was just that God cracked the sky open and handed down to mankind, right?
Right.
This is a collection of fables and allegories, um that have been compiled together in different languages, omitting certain parts and adding others over the course of thousands of years, right?
Right.
Until we reach the point that we are, right? So I think that these things are great to reference, to learn from, to ponder upon, but living your entire life in submission to these stories, um I don't know, to me it's just it's a bit it's a bit concerning, right?
Hmm.
um yeah, so I think that's my ending perspective on everything that was said here today, right?
Hmm.
Is that y'all, like, I think what I've gathered here is that the most important things is to make sure that the reins of your journey are always in your hand, right?
I agree.
um and wherever that journey may lead you, that's fine, I don't care. um but just make sure that you're controlling that journey, right? um don't let nobody else control that, whether it be directly, whew, burp, whether that be directly, or whether that be passive aggressively through trying to shame you or paint a certain narrative on you that makes you feel socially pressured into adopting their beliefs and their way of life, right? Is there anything else that you wanted to hit on here today?
Something that came to mind when I was you was talking about the feminine aspect, like a woman in her raw feminine energy. Um, I wanted to add up on that with the whole, like, there's some women who, they'll take that pathway of Lilith or Eve, and some women, they don't mind being that subordinate, or they don't mind being that subservient archetype where they're just up under the man for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, just cooking and cleaning, and that's just all they think they're good for. When it comes to the Lilith path, it is only for a certain few of people, because when it comes to her pathway where she deviates from the garden, deviates from this system, um, you have women who are like influenced to walk that pathway, but some women, they take that pathway and they kind of become that demon or that night creature, that wants to wreak havoc on the world, and basically project her trauma to the world and things of that nature. And I could do bad all by myself, and that whole, all those shenanigans. But
Mm-hmm.
there's there's a point in that journey where the woman, she goes through her rage, and it's okay to go through that phase of frustration, of a system that you live in, or society, or being raised up a certain type of way, or people that you've had relationships with. But it gets to a point to where, you have two different paths as you're walking that journey. It's either you can continue to become, tyrannical and wreaking havoc, or you can become an alchemist, utilize that pain into power, and triumph over that pain and that trauma, and become the best version, or the best, potential in your own personal life. And that's how I see Lilith, is that she went through that, that change and that rebellion, that revolution, to then become better. A better example of feminine energy. And I kind of correlate this to Lucifer in the show, and the Netflix show, which is a great show. But they show his transformation throughout different seasons, and he kind of takes in this persona of being the devil, and he's like, "Well, I'm the devil, I do this and I do that." One thing for sure, he never liked the narrative that humans would give him, of like he's the one that's responsible for people sinning and everything of that sort. He's like, "Well, no, it's you. You're accountable for that." But what I found interesting, that just like came into my mind just now, is that Lucifer in the Netflix show, he was only the devil, and only had these evil traits within himself, and would have his devil face and would appear as a demon, because it was in his mind. Because he saw himself as a bad person, he became a bad person externally, you know, because he was called this evil devil, and because he was depicted ugly and everything of that sort. He was like, well, I'm gonna identify as that. Like, he unconsciously identified as that. As the seasons go on, not to spoil anything, but as the seasons go on, he began to deviate from that, and then understand that he can create his own identity out of his trauma, and out of the pain that he had from rebellion, and from, the slander. And so I think with women, when they walk that pathway of, you know if you become this city girl, if you become like Lilith, if you become like Jezebel, if you become of a woman who walks her own personal path, like how you were saying, like these women, they become demonized to the point where they're like, oh, you're not going to have any kids, you're not going to get married, no man ever going to want you. And so some women, because they've heard this propaganda, you know, this Yahwehan propaganda, they take that, and they're like, well, you say I ain't gonna have a man. Well, I don't need a man anyway. Or You say that I'm not going to have kids. Well, I don't want no kids anyway. And instead of turning that around and using that for your own power and your own advantage, you kind of identify with the trauma. You identify with the hate. Um, and I think that the true path of Lilith is that you utilize that, and instead of identifying with being this night creature who takes kids, or this evil, wretched, bitter spirit that can't have a man and can't provide, I think you become the exact opposite and become the mother of children. You become the giver of life. You become the one that all lovers go to and that all men want and desire. You know, it kind of also goes back to Kali in the Hindu mythology, where she's wreaking havoc and fury, and it took Shiva to really stop her in her tracks and really lay down. And when she realized that her tyranny is causing her other counterpart or her other half to even be put in harm's way, she calms down and is put back in balance. Which I found to be a very beautiful story between Kali and Shiva, because most people see the depiction of Kali over Shiva, and very few people see this archetype where Shiva also is minimized, and Shiva or Shakti is also minimized, and Shiva becomes the bigger person, which is that whole it's the whole dynamic of what Lilith wanted. Lilith wanted that balance, and that's what she was trying to look for with Adam. Adam was too egotistical, and you'll see that with a lot of men. They'll be very egotistical to not want to have that balance with a woman because they don't really see that within themselves. You know, and they don't see that reflection within the woman, because some men, you know, is even more to the ego self, but even more so is their insecurities and their lack of love for themselves. So just to end off on you know my thought perceptions on that is, when walking that pathway of becoming the rebel or becoming the adversary, like people they come on my page and they think that you just becoming a rebel out of spite. You just becoming the adversary out of spite. You just trying to create all this chaos and be evil out of spite. And it's like, well, no, there's a purpose. You're embracing the darkness to shine your light. You're not embracing the darkness to stay in darkness. You're going into darkness to transform, and that's the whole perception of, like what Jesus was talking about with Nicodemus, that a person must be born again to enter the kingdom. You know, when you're in the womb for 9 months, it's just complete darkness. You know, up until you're born, you come to the light. And I think that's the beauty of that pathway of becoming the rebel and becoming the adversary, becoming the devil's advocate, that you embrace darkness, because the darker the brighter your light is, the darker your shadow. You know, and so you have to really embrace the darkness, embrace the pain, embrace all the different, you know, the shadows of the world, because you're not of the world, but you embrace the shadows and the different perceptions and darkness to shine your light and to become the light of the world. That's it. And that's all.
Well, dang. I don't think I can articulate that any better, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, we have put a lot on the table for the people to digest and to reflect upon. I hope y'all are listening, right? Um, because I know that fear, ego, shame, um, these feelings that we encounter are largely what keeps us from ever evolving into our highest self, right?
Right.
Because we are so afraid of, like you said, breaking into that darkness, stepping into um something that is unknown and is completely reliant on you to illuminate that space, right?
Yeah.
That can be a very lonely and fearful and disheartening feeling, knowing that this shit is deep and dark out here, and the only way it's gonna change is if I do something about it, right?
Mm.
um a lot of people like relying on pre-made light, a lot of people like relying on the light of others, and that kind of comes full circle to what you said earlier about how some women like being barefoot in the kitchen and just shutting the fuck up and, and following orders because they couldn't fathom having dreams, goals, ambitions, taking the reins of their life into their own hands and being responsible for that. They
Mm-hmm.
kind of like standing in the pun intended, standing in the shadow of somebody else, right? um
Mm-hmm.
or like I said, they're afraid to step out of it. um and if that's you, fine, but don't talk to me crazy. That's a you thing. you know don't project that on the. Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
My bad. Somebody tried to call. Let me go ahead and get off here. But yeah, stop projecting. Stop projecting, y'all. Stop trying to control people and stop projecting. Make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe, run those views up. Go follow Roan, the Omnis Roan. Go check his shit out. There's a lot of great information there. I love what you do, sir. Um, yeah. We definitely gotta do part two. We gotta, I'm sure you'll be back again,
Oh,
to
most
delve into more,
definitely.
right?
Hmm.
All right. Thanks for coming. Bye, y'all. Good
Thank you for
night.
having me.